Hello and welcome to the Matchbook Champions League podcast. I'm Phil Kitromilides. We're back. The tournament returns this week with the last 16, and we're here to look ahead to the four ties that we've got to look forward to in the forthcoming days. I'm joined by European football writer Nicky Bandini and Mark O'Hare from We Love Betting to preview the games coming up this week. We'll get to those in just a second. Before we get to the matches, want to tell you about the outright market, because it's been a while since we've had any Champions League action, and still Manchester City are the favourites to win the Champions League at 5.50, Liverpool 5.8, Bayern 7.8. You can get Barcelona and PSG at around about 8.6, Juventus 12.5, Real Madrid at 16.5, which seems a huge price, and one of Mark's outside picks right at the start of the competition, Leipzig at 33.0. Mark, welcome along. Nice to see you. It's been a while.
It has. It's been a while since we chatted Champions League football. A lot can change in football in that time, and I think a lot has.
But what hasn't changed is that Manchester City are still the favourites. Why?
Well, I mean, the boring answer is these odds are kind of compiled by very sophisticated models based around shop data and performance data.
Right.
They were favourites at this stage last season as well, and they have been from the outset of this competition. But, as we've all seen with our own eyes, that Liverpool are clearly the best team in Europe right now and probably should be favourites. I don't really buy this narrative that Man City are now more likely to win the competition because they're out of the title race. I don't think you can just turn things on and off that easily, especially at this kind of level of football. But certainly City are one to oppose at those kind of prices.
Mark mentioned that some things change in the space of 2.5 months. Nicky, are there any teams that you feel are in a better position now than when the draw was made, or in a worse position now from when the draw was made?
I mean, I suppose that the obvious one is that sometimes the more things stay the same, the more they change, to reverse the old saying, which is Liverpool haven't lost. We sort of expected them at some point to slip up. We still, I think, most of us think at some point it should happen, just because it normally does, because there has only been two teams in English sort of top flight history that have got through a whole season without slipping up. But the fact that Liverpool have just been so consistent, so relentless this season, I think it can't not change your opinion of them. I always say with the Champions League, it's very easy to get caught up in what happens in the first few months of the season. People watch the group stages, they see the draw, and they make a decision there and then about who's going to go through. When the reality is it's a knockout tournament, and so how you're playing in February and March can condition so much of what you're likely to be able to do. But Liverpool are still playing as well, if not better, and I think that's something that I wouldn't have known when the draw was made. And the longer it goes on, the harder it is for me to justify not thinking they're the favourite for this tournament, frankly. I think there's lots of other teams that could win it, but when you go through all of the other sort of big clubs, there's question marks with all of them. Yeah. And I suppose you can make questions with Liverpool if you want to. You could say, hey, they didn't beat Napoli in the group stage. There are ways to get them still. They're still mortal. But I think that when you go through the other big clubs, I feel like the question marks are bigger. So for me, them just being so consistent probably has changed my perception of them and perhaps pushed them to being my outright favourite now.
Yes. Well, you and a lot of people, I think.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a really shocking thing to say.
It is very hard to find any sort of faults with this Liverpool side. We'll talk about their visit to the Spanish capital a little bit later on in the programme. We are a podcast. We're still a podcast. If you're listening to us, great. Thanks for downloading. But we are also broadcasting live now on the Matchbook YouTube and Facebook and Twitter accounts. So if you want to drop us any comments there, feel free to do that. And we also have to say thank you to everyone who voted for us as best betting podcast in the Smart Betting Club Awards. We've won the award for 2 years in a row. We're very proud of that and we're very pleased. So thank you very much. Right, to the matches then this week. Spurs against RB Leipzig. We'll start with that and give you the prices for the game. You can see there, Spurs, you can get them around about 2.49 to win. RB Leipzig 3.04. The draw around about 3.6. Leipzig had a bit of a wobble before the weekend. They'd gone 4 games without a win, then they bounced back and they beat Werder Bremen 3-0 at the weekend. Obviously, Spurs had a dramatic last gasp victory over Aston Villa. But Mark, I saw you mentioning this on social media today. Leipzig have got some pretty serious injury concerns ahead of this game.
Yeah, it's not ideal. Their captain and leader, sort of Willy Orban, is out. He has been for a while. Ibrahima Konate, I should say, the centre half as well. He's also injured. But more importantly, they've got Upamecano, their best centre half, really is banned for this game as well. So 3 recognised centre backs missing. It's not the end of the world. Klosterman and Halstenberg have been playing kind of makeshift centre back roles in their back 3 or their back 5, if you look at it as a 5. They've also got other players who can fill in there, but they also sold Deme, their defensive midfielder, to Napoli in January as well. So there will be a few square pegs in round holes in London this midweek. And defensive game plan or ability isn't really their forte anyway. It's all about their attack, really. Going forward, they've got the likes of Timo Werner, Dani Olmo now as well, Christopher Nkunku, Yusuf Poulsen, players banging form, particularly in Werner. So they can cause problems, but defensively there is issues there at the moment. And you kind of mentioned the sort of wobble they've had so far in 2020. They've also had a few wobbles against the leading teams in the Bundesliga domestically and in the Champions League. And Julian Nagelsmann is a fantastic coach. He could be turning out to be basically the new Pep Guardiola at some point, but he's still learning his trade. And especially in the bigger games that Leipzig have played, they've not really been able to engineer a 90-minute performance. They've excelled in patches, but also been pretty ordinary in others. We saw that especially when they went away to Bayern Munich recently. They drew 0-0 on the second half alone. They could have easily won it. They spurned a few chances, but in the first half, they could have easily been a couple of goals down as well. And so he's still knurling his trade. This is a new venture for him and Leipzig. So there's massive inexperience there up against Jose Mourinho. Nagelsmann actually was labelled Baby Mourinho back in his Hoffenheim days, even though that's completely different from in terms of how they approach the game. But it's an interesting kind of angle there. Because I just don't know how Nagelsmann's going to approach this with the injuries and issues defensively, but also in that Bayern game, he kind of went against his normal ideals of high pressing and all-out attack to sit very passively and sit deep defensively. So considering this is the first time he and Leipzig have been to this level, it's hard to sort of second guess how they're going to approach this. If he's got any sort of sense, he's a very intelligent guy, obviously. It's the away leg. He should be well aware that away goals are absolutely vital in this sort of when we get to the knockout stage, and Spurs themselves are far from watertight themselves. So you'd hope they'd take an attacking approach to this, but it's an interesting quandary to have at the moment, not knowing the team sheets or how they're going to approach this game.
Okay, so no tip at the moment for that particular game.
No, I mean, I think overall I was looking at Leipzig to qualify. I think when the draw was made, they were underdogs. What we've seen since, Leipzig have kind of shortened up in the prices in the markets, and now it's a bit of a pick'em game. But just from a Spurs perspective, you look at the games that they've won under Mourinho. They fluked it against Man City. They did so against Wolves as well. Apart from that, they've beaten Villa, Norwich, Brighton, Burnley, Bournemouth, and West Ham. They had to have replays against Middlesbrough and Southampton in the Cup, and then they went from 2-0 down to beat Olympiacos at home as well. So they've only won the expected goals battle in 2 of their last 9 games, and both of those were against Norwich. So, it's hardly flattering form. There's nothing really for me to fear there from a Leipzig perspective. So I'm hoping they go out and attack this team. So maybe it's one for in play, just see how the team's set up in terms of formation, system, and personnel. But I'm not going to rule out Spurs either, because they've got plenty of ability in the final third, despite Harry Kane's absence as well. And as I mentioned, Leipzig, even without the absentees, aren't exactly renowned for their defensive systems.
Nicky, this does seem like quite an open tie between two sides that don't necessarily convince. Obviously, Leipzig have had a bit of a wobble, and I mean, personally, for me, Spurs under Jose Mourinho, there hasn't been much of an improvement from what was going on before with Pochettino, and they don't seem particularly convincing, certainly defensively.
No, I mean, I think it's interesting because I think a lot of the criticisms that valid criticisms that were just being talked about with Leipzig could be applied to Tottenham. I mean, I think that you could easily say, they're missing some important players. I mean, Harry Kane is about as important an individual as you could pick on that team. If you're going to say take one player out of Tottenham's squad, who's it going to be that's going to be most damaging? I think it's Kane, even though they still have attacking options. I think the fact that Eriksen left in January as well does mean they're one lighter in that set of attacking options. And sure, we know what Son can do. We know, in fact, that Son has at times been at his best when Kane has been absent, and certainly scored a pretty crucial goal against Villa at the weekend. So it's not that they're short of options. They certainly have options, but they are missing their individually best striker. And again, missing Eriksen, which is somebody who gave them options and who has been important, certainly last year in the run to the Champions League final. I think they are, in many ways, as much of a mystery as Leipzig. I don't think I've got Mourinho's Tottenham sussed. I don't at all, to be honest with you. I think I'm inclined to agree with you in that I was a big believer in Pochettino and what he was doing and the systems that he had. And yes, it had been a tough start to the season, but there felt like a direction of travel with Pochettino, even if it had gone a little bit. Mourinho, we've seen different things. We've seen some very cagey games, and then recently we've seen some games where they've looked just very ropey at the back, to be honest. And yes, of course, I think about Timo Werner, I think about how fast he is, I think about the damage he can do. But then, on the other hand, he hasn't scored in 4 games. He's suddenly, gone a little bit off the boil. I know it's all relative. It's not exactly talking about a 3-month-long drought there, but he hasn't scored lately. And so there's just so many questions with both of these teams. I could easily see either of them winning, and frankly, I feel like a little bit I could almost easily see either of them winning quite comfortably, because I think either of them could implode. So,
yes.
So it's a really interesting tie. I think there's a lot of interesting ties in this round, to be honest with you, but it's not one that I feel confident predicting, I have to admit.
Okay, guys, we're not entirely sure what's going to happen in this one. I think that's the bottom line, but it should be entertaining. Let's move on to Atalanta against Valencia. Well, I think I might know what might happen in this game. I'm not an expert, but if I was, I'd be backing goals in this game. Atalanta to win at home, 1.78. You can get Valencia at 4.9 to win in Bergamo, with the draw at 4.1. There you can see the goal line down there, 1.95. That's a good. I don't know. I like the look of that goal line there, Mark. I don't know about you. Nicky, tell us about Atalanta, because we've been talking about them all season, really, about this exciting side from the north of Italy into the Champions League for the first time, doing incredible stuff. They were top scorers in last season's Serie A. They're top scorers by some distance so far in the Italian top flight. Their goals per game average is 4 goals a game in Serie A. They're fantastic to watch. And have they got a chance to make it through?
I think they've got more than a chance. I'm slightly surprised at how short they are to win at home.
Yes.
I'll say that. I think those are shorter than I thought they would be. But if you're asking on balance who I expect to get through this tie, I do lean Atalanta's way. And I think it's such a fascinating position they're in, because, this entire Champions League campaign, in many senses, was a free hit for them. They qualified, and that was beyond anything that they were expected to do, far beyond, what was required of Gasperini as a manager. And so they got there and it was like, what, this is going to be fun. We're going to play some football. And it almost wasn't, because it started so badly that actually, losing 4-0 to Zagreb right off the bat was almost the one thing that could put a dampener on this sort of incredible experience. But now they've got through, and it's even more of a free hit. There's nothing that's expected of this team. But on the other hand, they just beat Roma at the weekend to go 6 points clear in 4th place. So the Champions League for next season is looking surprisingly solid, given how late we are in the campaign. And now they have this chance to cut loose, to play with sort of total freedom, knowing that it doesn't matter. I mean, first of all, they're probably going to be back here next year, or at least in the group stage. And secondly, I mean, it's working. This is their identity. This is who they've been. I think it couldn't be a better situation for them to be playing this game and knowing that load of domestic competition. Not that it's guaranteed. 6 points you can easily lose in 12 games, but it feels pretty solid at the moment. And that this game can just be enjoyed, because that's when Atalanta are at their best, when they're enjoying their football, when they're taking those risks and feeling a little bit like they can do something. Of course, it helps that Duvan Zapata, who's been injured, has just come back in the last few games. I think it's going to be super interesting to see how Gasperini approaches that. He started against Roma, but they won the game after he went off. He's obviously a classic number 9. And what's interesting is that in the meantime, while he's been out, they've been operating much more with false 9s, often with Papu Gomez leading the line. And that is a real sort of interesting choice for him now, about whether he feels more comfortable going up against Valencia with something a bit more unpredictable or with something a bit more classic. I think he's got a really strong hand on that, because Zapata, who did look a little bit rusty at the beginning, I thought he played well against Roma. I think he's starting to look like himself again. So it's a genuine option rather than an obligation to do something. And look, Valencia are a team who concede goals. Now, Atalanta also concede goals, and that's why this game, a bit like the last one, is unpredictable. Atalanta likes to play on high effects. They rely on the one-on-one battles all across the pitch, and that can go against you as well as going for you. But and that's why I certainly wouldn't say that again. I look at those odds for this game and thought they're shorter than I think they should be. It's certainly not a guarantee. But if you ask me who I think is going through this tie, I think it's a confident Atalanta team, honestly.
Okay. Let's see. I mean, one thing that does seem quite easy to predict, or looks like it is going to happen, is it for it to be a high-scoring game. It usually is with Atalanta. Mark, Valencia are so difficult to predict. You don't know which Valencia team you're going to get. In La Liga, we saw them get absolutely thrashed by Mallorca 4-1 a couple of weeks ago, and then the next week they went and beat Barcelona 2-0, and it could have been 5-0. Then they were thrashed by Getafe 3-0, and then on Friday night they played pretty well to get a 2-2 draw against Atletico Madrid in the Champions League. They won away at Ajax, but they got thrashed at home 3-0 by Ajax. They dropped points against Lille as well. I mean, I've no idea what kind of Valencia side is gonna take to the field against Atalanta.
Yeah, they are very hard to second guess. I mean, it's more sort of traditional, really, but you expect them to be stronger, more effective, and more efficient at the Mestalla rather than away from home. And certainly those two games you mentioned there with Getafe and Mallorca were quite scary and worrying from a Valencia perspective. How easy they folded in those games, and this is going to be tough for them because they concede a lot of shots, a lot of chances. Their XG numbers are very poor away from home as well in terms of what they concede, and no team in Italy creates more opportunities than Atalanta going forward. So if they're on their game, this could easily get quite ugly for Valencia if Atalanta do fancy it, which you expect they will do. I agree with everything Nicky said. I think Atalanta are a little bit too short. They went off 1.7 at home to Dynamo Zagreb. To see them 1.8 at home to Valencia, it's quite skinny for me for a Champions League knockout tie. They've never been here before, so we don't know how this kind of pressure is going to affect them. I suspect it won't. They're the kind of team that just kind of goes out and plays their game as they wish. But Valencia, yeah, I mean, you mentioned Friday night, two pretty clumsy goals they conceded there, and defensively, I do have worries about them. I know Florenzi's back, but Daniel Vass has been filling in. I don't think he's a right back by trade. They've also got Gabriel and Garay out missing, injured, which means you're probably looking at Mangala and Diakabi at centre-half, which is quite a frightening prospect against a team who presses high as well. I think there's fitness doubts over Rodrigo and Coquelin as well. So yeah, tactically, I think Atalanta hold the advantage in most areas. I think they'll create chances. It's up to the forwards there, Zapata and Co, to put the chances away, really. So, yeah, I think over 2 3/4 goals is a very fair line for this. It's the bet I picked out. Do expect Atalanta to qualify. Do expect them to win this match, but too short in that respect. They were actually underdogs for this tie when it was made back in December. Now they're favourites to qualify. A lot of cash has come for Atalanta. You can understand why they are rated the #1 team in Italy by all the underlying metrics, despite the league position. And I think if they do fancy it, this could get ugly for Valencia. But just on the Spaniards, they've actually scored in all but 2 of their La Liga matches and scored in 5 of their 6 group games too. So there should be opportunities for them as well.
Over 5.5 goals is at 10.2. If you fancy it, I'll just leave it there because that could be an option. You never know with Atalanta. Let's move on because we have to talk about the reigning European champions, Liverpool, who head to the Estadio Wanda Metropolitano to take on Atletico Madrid. We spoke at the top of the program how highly fancied Liverpool are to win the competition. Again, they're at 2.22 to win in the Spanish capital. You can get Atleti at 3.9 to claim a first leg victory, with the draw at 3.4. Is there any value marking backing and win for Liverpool here? I mean, 2.22 for Liverpool to win any football match at the moment seems like pretty good odds.
Yeah, I mean, I've been looking at this. I'm thinking, is this a trap? Are Liverpool too big? Are they too short? Because despite everything you can say about Atletico Madrid, and you know well enough, Phil, you've seen them a lot this season. They're not the Atletico Madrid of old. They've dropped off quite significantly, going through a major transition. Simeone doesn't look happy, but what you know about them is on a European night, when the odds are against them, it's where they kind of come to the fore. And I think they'll expect to set up an usual 4-4-2 with 4 effectively central midfielders and two low blocks, invite the pressure, and just try and kill the game, really. That's Atleti's style, and it's going to be up to Liverpool to try and break them down. In that respect, I don't think it's going to be a high-scoring game at all. And, you know, Atletico's record at home in Champions League games under Diego Simeone, they're unbeaten. They've only conceded 2 goals in 12. It's quite remarkable, really. And if you look at how Liverpool struggles this season, the 2 games against Napoli, Napoli went 4-4-2 under Carlo Ancelotti and kind of restricted those flying fullbacks, Alexander-Arnold and Robertson. And I think Atletico will have identified that as kind of similar to how they set up anyhow. And that could be an area of concern, not really concern, I should say, but an area where Atletico could essentially nullify Liverpool a little bit. So I'm going to take a little bit more insurance, really, than just backing Liverpool outright. If you back them minus a quarter goal on the Asian handicap, you're only losing half your stake if the game is a draw. I certainly can't see Atletico winning this game. They've had their injury issues, especially in attack. I know Morata came back at the weekend and Costa is in the squad. But you're not going to get much change out of Gomez and Van Dijk. Also, Trippier's injured. He's the second for assists this season, which obviously his delivery into the box from crosses and free kicks is going to be missing as well. And Liverpool have kept 14 clean sheets in 18 games now when Gomez has started alongside Van Dijk. If you look at Atletico's record as well at home against the big 2 in Spain, they've struggled recently since the move to the Wanda. And since November, they've played Real Madrid twice, Barcelona and Juventus there. Failed to score in all of them. 3 of them ended in 1-0 defeats. The other one was a goalless draw. So I think that's where we're looking here. If you want to look towards the correct score market, back Liverpool to win 1-0, potentially back the 0-0 as well. I think it's a real runner in this game at a big price. But if you're looking for something a bit more attractive, then the under 2 goal line is odds against around 2.2, which means if there's exactly 2 goals, you get your stake back. If there's 1 goal or 0 goals, you get paid out. 3 goals or more and you lose. Atleti's games were notoriously low scoring, especially this season. They are misfiring in attack, but defensively they're still pretty strong in terms of conceding chances. So, and I just think at Liverpool, despite the incredible run in the Premier League, I don't think Jurgen Klopp will be at all displeased if he goes back to Anfield with a 0-0 or a 1-1.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a very solid angle, actually, to approach this game. I really do think it could also be a low-scoring game. Atletico Madrid this season, they are not the Atletico of previous seasons. 11 teams have scored more goals than them in La Liga. And as we said, this is a first leg as well, so it could be pretty cagey. Do you think it would be something like that, Nicky, a tighter game than people might think?
Well, it's fascinating. I mean, the first thing to say in terms of a tight game, you've got, in my opinion, what might well be the 2 best goalkeepers in the world right now, Oblak and Alisson at either end. So there's every possibility of being a low-scoring game, certainly. And in many ways, I think that's almost the thing which gives me most hope for Atletico, because I think on paper it doesn't look good for them. This is not. In many ways, it's something that I would have loved to have seen. I would have loved to have seen this sort of peak vision of Jurgen Klopp's football against a peak vision of Simeone's football. I think that would have been a culture clash. It would have been fascinating. It would have been 2 of European football's great ideologues of recent times, both of whom similar in character in a way, but also very different in the football that they create. But we're not going to see peak Atletico. We're going to see a team that's been sort of ravaged by injury in all positions, certainly up front. Where I think the only 2 players who've played with any consistency this season are Oblak and Saul, basically. So the lack of consistency in that team has been hugely disruptive. The constant reshuffling that has had to be done by Simeone.
I mean, Saul's played a lot at left back.
Yeah, exactly. Saul's been there, but he hasn't been able to play in the same positions most of the time. So I think there's sort of a couple of things that give me pause for Liverpool. The first is that their European away record isn't that great. And I think that it's one of those interesting stats because you can bring it up, but actually very few, even of the most successful teams in Europe, actually have that good an away record when you break it down and look at it. It's hard to win away from home in Europe. So this leg in particular is one to perhaps get through rather than necessarily win. I think if Liverpool were to draw it, they'd feel perfectly comfortable about going back to the COP and winning there. So there won't be necessarily the urgency to do that. But the trap for Liverpool, in my opinion, is basically what I've already alluded to. It's that you've got one of the great goalkeepers playing right now in Jan Oblak, and you have still, even though this Atletico team is missing pieces, even though it isn't playing as a fluid collective as Zanini would like, you have enough individual talent in that team to score a goal, right? You have players who can score a goal. Saul can score a goal. Morata can score a goal. These aren't unthinkable scenarios. So I think that's the trap basically, is if they can't find a way past, and Atletico can. But on paper, and in my expectation, this looks like an ugly match for Atletico right now. They're not playing well.
Yes. Okay. Let's move on to the final game that we're going to talk about, and I think there are going to be goals in this one. Borussia Dortmund against Paris Saint-Germain. Let's take a look at the markets to win. You can get Borussia at 3.0, PSG are the favourites at 2.38, the draw at 4.0. That goal line mark is pretty high, but are you interested in 1.86 for over 3.25?
Yeah.
Can I tempt you? Yeah.
Yeah, just about really. It sounds ridiculous, but I spent a lot of today looking at this match, trying to find ways to oppose the goal line and basically back a low-scoring game. And the only thing I could come up with really was it's the first leg of a knockout tie in the Champions League. So naturally they are slightly more cautious than second legs. But apart from that, it's really difficult because, yeah, they look at the way Dortmund are playing at the moment, particularly at home. Fullbacks are flying forward. The team are just all about engineered to get forward and score goals. Obviously, the January signings have made a big impact as well.
But they've scored 3 goals in like all the last games that they've played. At least 3 goals, minimum 3 goals in the last 5 or 6 matches.
Yeah, it's incredible. And at this stage of the season in the Bundesliga, no team has ever scored more goals than Dortmund. They're down in 3rd place or 4th place in the Bundesliga. But defensively, they're atrocious. More away from home than not. So I think they kept a clean sheet against Frankfurt on Friday night and reduced Frankfurt to basically nothing in the final third. And you could see the way Hummels, or in the quotes that Hummels and Favre were talking about after the game, they were so delighted about their defensive performance. It was all about that. And they're sort of saying, if we can produce this again in midweek, we've got a great chance in qualifying. I'm not sure they're capable of doing that against this PSG team, who quite often have been playing a frightening front four themselves, have the weapons to hurt any team really. Obviously, what we saw at the weekend of PSG going 3-0 down in half an hour against Amiens created a few headlines, but in fairness, Thomas Tuchel said after the match it didn't really matter at all because he'd made so many changes to his team. There was no Mbappe, no Neymar, Verratti and Marquinhos when he came on at half time to try and turn things around. But Thiago Silva had a really poor game on his return from injury, and their 17-year-old centre-half Tanguy Kouassi scored twice. He's quite a tall lad. He might have an opportunity in starting here, and if so, the likes of he and a few others with a bit of height might have a good joy against this Dortmund team, who are particularly poor from defending set pieces. But yeah, overall, don't think that match and that result matters at all for this game. I think it's all about goals. Dortmund are missing Royce and Brandt, but you look elsewhere, there's just goals galore with Sancho and Haaland in incredible form, really. PSG are conceding goals, and their Champions League games always seem to feature plenty of goals. 25 of the last 30 featured at least 3. They've only kept 5 European clean sheets and 17 away from home since 2015-16. They came against Celtic and Anderlecht, Man United, Galatasaray and Club Brugge. 10 of those 13 featured at least 4 goals, which is what we're looking at to try and achieve here. And yeah, Dortmund's last 8 matches, all competitions, have averaged 5.5 goals. PSG's last 5 have averaged 5.8. Dortmund have seen 8 of their last 9 go over 3.5. 5 of those 6 since the winter break have gone over 4.5. So yeah, I just think
just imagine you, Mark. You've been studying all day. You've been trying to come up with, no, that's not going to make me back a low-scoring game. That's not going to right. It's got to be goals. Yeah.
Well, I'm interested to hear what Nicky says, because to me, this game is all about the attacks on both teams. They're both better going forward. The only thing that's holding me off here is the first leg kind of dynamic of the tie. But the goal line is high, but I think it's worth backing. It's
going to be fun, isn't it, Nicky?
I think so. I hope so. Sorry, my dog is interjecting slightly in this podcast, sticking his face on the screen right now. I apologise.
We welcome guests.
I think so. This is of all the games this round, and look, there's a lot of ties in this round that I think are really compelling. But this is the one that I'm most looking forward to, frankly, and it's because of that. I just don't. I almost can't see how it wouldn't feature lots of goals. I mean, yeah, Dortmund have vulnerability from set pieces, but how about the fact that Dortmund's back three is really slow? I mean, Hummels, Piszczek, even Zagadou, these aren't fast players, and Mbappe is really fast, guys. And Neymar's back, of course. There's going to be lots of hubbub about him, and he's just been taking a little. There's been an inevitable Neymar chat about the fact that he was off taking a break in Germany and disappearing right before this game. But he's in the squad. He's going to play. And that at least feels like a step forward, because normally this time of year is the time when Neymar gets injured and it all falls apart for PSG in the Champions League. So, yes, I mean, speed-wise, I see a big problem for Dortmund at the back. I think the way that Dortmund like to play, they do commit so hardly to the attack that they need their defenders to be able to win one-on-one duels. And I can't see them winning these one-on-one duels. On the other hand, Haaland is scoring a goal every 45 minutes thereabouts. So they've got that. They've got Sancho, and as has already been talked about, Thiago Silva just back from injury and not playing particularly well. Not certain that this older version of Thiago Silva feels like a good matchup with Haaland, and his physicality and his sort of, I don't know, that raw. I don't know how to describe it with him. That sort of raw power of youth that he plays with, that absolute sort of not just dominating you with his technique, of which he is abundantly talented, but also just physically getting on top of you. That feels bad. So I just can't not see goals, which I hate saying, because I always think when I say that, that means somehow we're going to get a grim goalless draw. But these two teams, I mean, they're both flawed, but they're both flipping brilliant as well.
If it's 0-0, if this game is 0-0, I will buy you both a very extravagant and lavish dinner. There you go. Okay, I'm on record as saying it, so there we go. Don't start rooting for the 0-0. It's going to be exciting. We almost guarantee that. That's just about it for this edition of the Matchbook Champions League podcast. Before we go, need to get your best bets of the week. I've got a feeling that they're probably going to be the same bet because. Well, let me see. Mark, your best bets of the week, please, for the Champions League last 16 first leg matches.
Can I be annoying and pick two?
Okay.
You're increasing your chances of getting my one.
Well, they're both, in terms of a staking fan, they'd both be getting the same treatment. So I've got to put both up, really. Atalanta v Valencia over 2 3/4 goals. And then the under 2 goal line in Atletico Madrid against Liverpool. Okay, good. I thought you were going to back the Atalanta Valencia. So, Nicky, I'm assuming you're going to go something similar?
That's absolutely what I had in mind. And I saw the odds for that of all the ones this week that stood out to me. It was that. I again, I can be wrong. I have been plenty of times. But to me, I struggle to imagine how this game doesn't end up with at least 3 goals in it, because that's how Atalanta play. And I don't think that Valencia are capable of coming to Italy and shutting the game down. I think their best chance, in fact, of winning the game is not to do that. It's to engage with Atalanta and look for those mistakes, those opportunities that typically do come with Atalanta. Even look at their game against Roma at the weekend. They won it, and deservedly so. They were the better team, but they absolutely gifted Edin Dzeko with the goal for Roma, and they do that because of the way they play. So. Yeah, I think goals in that game at close to even money feels very generous to me.
There we go. Best bets of the week. It looks like it could be an entertaining week and hopefully a successful one for you as well. Thanks for joining us on this edition of the Matchbook Betting Podcast. We'll be back next week to look ahead to the other round of last 16 matches. Make sure you join us then. And in the meantime, subscribe to the Matchbook Betting Podcast on your preferred podcasting app. We'll be back soon. See ya.